Good evening, everyone. Before we formally commence the event, may I request you to please turn off your cell phones or switch them to a really silent mode. And please restrict the movement while the proceedings are in progress. Yeah, sometimes vibration mode is not silent. So once again, very warm welcome to IIM Calcutta. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here. On behalf of Board of Governors, Director, Deans, faculty and students, the MBA Office of IIM Calcutta has the privilege of welcoming you to the 33rd Institute Lecture Series of, with the Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar. We thank you for your gracious presence this evening, sir. So may I now invite our speaker, Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Chairperson, External Affairs Minister, our Chairperson of the Board of Governors of IIM Calcutta, Shri Krishna Kulkarni, Director of the Institute, Professor Uttam Kumar Sarkar, Dean Academic, Professor Bhaskar Chakrabarti, and Dean New Initiatives and External Relations, Professor Manish Thakur, to please take their seats on the dais. I now request our Director, Professor Uttam Kumar Sarkar, to felicitate the Honorable Chief Guest with a bouquet of flowers. Professor Sarkar, may I request you to deliver the welcome address and introduce our speaker for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Goel. Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable External Affairs Minister, Sri Krishna Kulkarni, Chairman, Board of Governors of IIM Calcutta, Professor Bhaskar Chakrabarti, Dean Academic, Professor Manish Thakur, Dean New Initiatives and External Relations, Professor Vishak Goel, MBA Chairperson, distinguished guests, faculty, ex-faculty, staff, students, alumni, media professionals, ladies and gentlemen, including those physically present and watching this event virtually from all over the globe. Very good evening and warm welcome to this event at IIM Calcutta. IIM Calcutta, the country's first IIM, is always abuzz with academic and extracurricular activities of students and teaching, research, consulting, executive education, and other professional activities of faculty and staff befitting a management institute of higher learning, such as ours. While these are among the primary activities we exist for and take pride in, one of the most satisfying experiences of belonging to our beloved IIM Calcutta fraternity is that we are privileged to explore the opportunities to come in contact with great minds and contributors to the society. Toward this enviable opportunity, we have formally put in place the Institute Lecture Series, under which we periodically invite luminaries who share their thoughts with us and by their proven performance silently inspire us to move forward, broaden the horizon of our learning, and set examples before us all, to our bright young students in particular, about what all things can be achieved in a single life. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so fortunate that in this 33rd lecture of the Institute Lecture Series, we have with us Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, we are all so proud of. I cannot express how grateful we are to Dr. Jaishankar for having accepted our invitation despite his unthinkably busy schedule. This shows how much you care for us and IIM Calcutta, sir. Thank you, sir. We have witnessed time and again Dr. Jayashankar's presence radiates positive energy and ensures positive results no matter how difficult the situation that befalls him at the world stage. While I would not undertake the impossible task of delving into the incredibly long list of multifaceted contributions Dr. Jayashankar has made to our nation and to the world at large, it's my pleasant duty and also a great privilege to say a few words about him, knowing fully well it would be rather redundant to this audience. Dr. Subramaniam Jayashankar is India's External Affairs Minister since May 30th, 2019. He is a member of Upper House, Rajya Sabha, of India's Parliament from the state of Gujarat. He had served in the Indian mission to the Soviet Union in Moscow from 1979 to 1981, where he also studied Russian language. Then he worked as Undersecretary in the Americas Division of India's Ministry of External Affairs and was part of the team that resolved the dispute over the supply of US nuclear fuel to Tarapur power station. From 1985 to 1988, he was the first secretary at the Indian Embassy in Washington, D.C. From 1988 to 1990, he served in Sri Lanka as first secretary and political advisor to the Indian peacekeeping force. From 1990 to 93, he was Counselor Commercial at the Indian Mission in Budapest. He also served in the President's Secretariat. Dr. Jayashankar later became the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Indian Embassy in Tokyo, 1996 to 2000. That was a time when the relation between the two countries was perhaps not at its best. He played some miracle role that subsequently brought the two prime ministers much closer, thus paving ways for a sustained mutual cooperation. He was India's ambassador to Czech Republic, 2000-2004. He had served as Joint Secretary Americas at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi and dealt with US-India civil nuclear agreement and also defense cooperation. From 2007 to 2009, Dr. Jayashankar served as India's High Commissioner to Singapore, helping to implement the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement that expanded the Indian business presence in Singapore. He served as ambassador to China 2009 to 13 and was involved in improving economic, trade, and cultural relations between China and India, and in managing the Sino-Indian border dispute as well. He was India's ambassador to United States 2013 to 15, and during that tenure, he addressed the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He was also president, Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons Private Limited from May 2018. Dr. Jayashankar is a graduate from St. Stephen's College at the University of Delhi. He has a master's in political science and an MPhil and PhD in international relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is an enviable polyglot. He speaks Russian, Japanese, Chinese, among other languages. Dr. Jayashankar is a recipient of Padma Shri Award in 2019. He has written a widely acclaimed best-selling book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which was published in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware how impatiently we are awaiting Dr. Jayashankar's talk on India and the world this evening. Let us fulfill our long-cherished desire without any further delay. Honorable Minister, sir, may I request you to address the audience, please?
Chairperson, Shri Krishna Kulkarni, Director, Professor Uttam Kumar Sarkar, Dean Academic, Professor Bhaskar Chakravarti, Dean New Initiatives and External Relations, Professor Anish Thakur, Chair MBA Program, Professor Abhishek Goel, students, faculty, alumni, guests, friends. Let me begin by saying what a great privilege it is to deliver the 33rd lecture of the Institute Lecture Series at IIM Calcutta. As a foreign minister, I have chosen to address you all on a topic that you might think is obvious, India and the world. But there is a reason for doing that beyond it being my immediate subject of jurisdiction. I'm conscious of speaking to a generation poised on the threshold of their professional life, for whom the world matters as never before. Let me take this occasion to tell you why. For a start, you might want to reflect how a pandemic that first engulfed a distant Chinese city then went on to take over your lives so completely for more than 2 years. Or how an ongoing conflict in Europe is now impacting our daily cost of living. And indeed, for that matter, the implications that climate events can have on the many processes that we take so much for granted. Or it could be a different kind of trauma. Terrorism, for instance, where any of us to be caught up in an act of cross-border terrorism or distantly inspired violence. In some cases, as we saw with students trapped in Ukraine or travelers stranded during COVID, that might happen when we are out of the country. But in others, be it COVID itself, conflict, terrorism, or natural disasters, such developments can come right to our doorstep, sometimes even inside our homes. Now, that does not mean that we need to be apprehensive about the world or even defensive in our approach. The flip side of the very interdependence that I underlined with those examples is that the same world is full of opportunities and possibilities. If we brought back 7 million plus Indians during COVID through the Vande Bharat mission, it is because the India of today utilizes the global workplace so effectively. It is due to the fact that our talents and skills are now an intrinsic element of global innovation, manufacturing, and services. It is also reflective of how many Indians actually travel for personal, professional, or tourism purposes. Indeed, these very issues are now central to Indian diplomacy. We strive to ensure better access to our talent, stronger protection for our workers, greater opportunities for our students, and fairer markets for our businesses. But the world is not simply about mobility and migration. It is as much about partnerships, compacts, and understandings that serve all parties well. In fact, a deeper engagement could mean accelerating our national development, exploring more markets, procuring resources, improving our quality of life, and not least, shaping crucial global issues that will determine the future of our planet. In truth, the globalized era in which we live is a double-edged world. It is hard to separate the vulnerabilities from the dependence or the risks from the benefits. The very mobility that brought COVID to our homes was otherwise such an enormous source of livelihood for so many. The supply chains which created disruption when they did not function were a boon when they did. Their complexity may be hard to overstate, as indeed their salience to critical aspects of our life. Let me give you two contemporary examples to highlight this aspect. The manufacturing of vaccines in India required ingredients and products from multiple countries and actually needed diplomatic intervention for them all to come through smoothly at that time. Conversely, many nations in the Gulf were dependent on our exports for their daily consumption of food, and that too had to be ensured through dialogue with them and through interventions at home. Indeed, if there is one big takeaway for the global economy from the COVID experience, it is one of more reliable and resilient supply chains. The just-in-time approach, with its over-centralization in a limited geography, has shown its downside very graphically. De-risking the world economy now requires a balancing just-in-case policy with more centers of production. Where India is concerned, this could mean another chance to board the bus of manufacturing that we had unfortunately missed a few times before. As you can see, this is exactly what the easier to do business approach and the offer of production-linked incentives of the Modi government are intended to ensure. Now, the last few years have also compelled us all to be much more digital. We in India actually have a record that I must tell you through my own interactions with counterparts and people abroad, a record that is generating respect across geographies. The scale of our digital delivery, whether it is food, finance, health, pension, or social benefits, the scale of it is today very much a talk of the world. Here too, the visible efficiency of the transformation has been accompanied by the risks of data privacy and data security. Where our data resides and who harvests it matters increasingly in an era of artificial intelligence. The political sociology of such residency or processing is no longer irrelevant. As a result, trust and transparency have become important guiding factors in digital decision making. Now, beyond the intricacies of supply chains and the vulnerability of data harvesting, there is a larger change today underway in international affairs that it's very important you comprehend. This emanates from the weaponization of everything. In recent years, we have already seen how trade, connectivity, debt, resources, and even tourism have become points of political pressure. The Ukraine conflict has dramatically widened the scope for such leveraging. The scale of financial measures, technology controls, infrastructure and service restrictions, and seizure of assets has truly been breathtaking. At the same time, it is also a fact that global rules and practices have been gamed for national advantage in a manner that can no longer be overlooked. Sharpening great power competition is inevitably creating stress factors across multiple domains. At one level, it induces greater caution about international exposure, but beyond a point, that cannot be safeguarded since the very nature of our existence is now globalized. For each nation, especially the major ones, a set of answers have to be found that optimize costs and benefits. This has led to a revival of interest in strategic autonomy, now redefined as ensuring national capabilities in core and sensitive areas. In that sense, we are not just moving towards a different model of global interaction, but also one of greater national opportunities. In India, we know that as Atmanirbhar Bharat. There's no question now that foreign policy has deep personal implications for all of us because it impinges on so many aspects of our life. It could be your safety, your welfare, your prospect, or your opportunities. It has transactional and collaborative connotations, especially in the economic and technology domains. Friendshoring and trusted providers are likely to be concepts that will gain ground in the coming days. As before, foreign policy is a constant exercise of building power and exercising influence, whether for national or collective purpose. It can be a competition too for ideas, values, or culture in order to set forth a vision for the future. Each of these facets coexist with the others. much more intensively, perhaps in an era of interdependence and interpenetration. International relations itself is now played out in more domains with much greater integration than before. But precisely because it impacts each one of us so deeply, it is essential that we have an obligation to take interest in the games that nations play. Now, it is a paradox that in many ways, even as we speak about the advancements of technology and the promise of science, world politics is actually moving back to the future. Some of this arises from the reality that expectations placed on globalization proved to be over-optimistic. This is not to suggest that the underlying economic interdependence is not well-founded, but by widening differences between and within societies and creating new global power equations, a different set of counter forces have now been set into motion. Once challenges began to be articulated, the globalization model was actually not easy to defend because the benefits were heavily skewed in favor of a few. The political manifestation of globalization has also created its own backlash. When self-appointed custodians of correctness sit in judgment over global happenings across a very wide set of domains, they cannot get away with it forever, especially when they themselves have a vested interest in the outcomes. To add to that, there is also now a proclivity to advance national methodologies that often verge on the mercantilist. We therefore have a situation where political and social identities have sharpened to a point where they create an inherent and unresolvable tension with the nature of economic flows in the world. Consequently, different nations are struggling to find an optimal balance, though the reason for each one of them may be a little different. Some seek to address regime security. Others want to protect their technology leads or sometimes their way of life. And still more, who would like, people like us for instance, who would like to build capabilities without exposing them too early to a competition that is often manifestly unfair. These endeavors are likely to be among the fundamental characteristics of world politics of our era. Our globalized world is likely to be both fractured and semi-coupled in select areas. There is, moreover, old-fashioned national rivalry also at play. It hasn't really gone away in a globalized world. Especially after 2008, the world has seen a sharper rebalancing and the emergence of multipolarity. The shifting terms of US engagement with the world in the last decade is one dimension. The ending of a forever war in Afghanistan appears to herald new ways of ensuring its security and furthering its interests. The rise of China is an equally profound development, one whose global consequences are becoming more apparent with each passing day. That so much of it is happening outside orthodox constructs is clearly challenging conceptually to both policymakers and to analysts. Far from being a zero-sum game, these developments have actually opened up space for other players, some essentially regional, but some with greater potential. Clearly, the world perceives India to be in the latter category. To this dynamic process, the Ukraine conflict has now highlighted the centrality of Russia and the strategic awakening of Europe. If this matrix looks complicated, then the volatility is further compounded by the uncertainty of the larger global arena. The unfairness of globalization and the stresses of the COVID experience have been aggravated by the shortages and costs that derive from developments in Ukraine. As a result, we are headed for a far more uncertain, I would say even insecure existence than we may have predicted just a few years ago. Now, such a prospect clearly calls for more diplomatic energy and greater political creativity, because it has to harmonize the pursuit of national interest with a responsibility for collective good. For a nation like India, where such a large segment of our population is so vulnerable, this means, above all, to mitigate the impact of key negative trends. In doing so, we not only stand up for our own welfare, but we speak as well on behalf of the global South. At the same time, we also have an obvious stake, along with them, in cooling down overheated global politics. This is obviously not going to happen overnight, yet we must persevere. But beyond the immediate compulsions, there are structural challenges of the current world order that confront us. The oldest trick in the diplomatic book is to freeze the moment to your advantage. That, in fact, is what some countries have done with multilateralism since 1945. Pursuing reform in that domain, especially in the United Nations, and striving to ensure that decision-making reflects democratic reality is therefore a quest of no small importance. Allowing the past to dictate terms is, however, not just a predicament that can be attributed to others. Sometimes it is actually a mindset or an assumption that we impose on ourselves because of a particular moment of our experience which continues to resonate. Thus, even 60 years later, the 1962 conflict with China shapes many of our attitudes. Our hesitations with the West similarly derive from the experience of 1948, 1965, and 1971. This even applies on the positive side of the ledger, where it can lead sometimes to unintended complacency. The 1992 economic reforms, for example, were impactful enough that the need for continuous building of national capabilities was not given the requisite priority till recently. We are now in a phase where both the ability and the responsibility for shaping the global landscape are much greater. It is expressed in new concepts that reflect our interests, like the Indo-Pacific, mechanisms like the Quad or the I2U2, or initiatives like the International Solar Alliance. Even on the economic front, we have been judicious in the manner and extent of engaging the world, picking the FTAs and framework that truly serve our interests. For all of us, the security of the nation obviously should come above all else. My own experience is that Indians are much more conscious of national security than many other people, since it has been so often challenged in the last 75 years. Indeed, when we evaluate the merits of leadership, for us, it is largely perceived as a mix of development delivery and crisis response. A lot of our foreign policy is devoted to preparing for, obviating, mitigating, and reacting to national security threats. But clearly, a time has come when we need to decisively address long-standing vulnerabilities that a competitive world regularly exploited. We need to equally apply ourselves to the hard task of securing our borders effectively without allowing systemic flaws to dilute them. At the same time, as the world penetrates into our daily existence more prominently, we must develop the awareness and responses to the problems that are actually posed by the normal. This could be digital, it could be financial, ideological, or sometimes just old-fashioned mobility. So even as we overcome constraints, hurdles, habits, and sometimes black swans, it is absolutely necessary for the young generation to understand how the world looks at us now. Indeed, many of the very challenges of the last few years have earned us great credit for coming through in the manner in which we did. There are, to my mind, 10 broad reasons why we are now taken more seriously, even as we are moving towards becoming a leading power. And those 10 reasons are: 1, our handling of the COVID, including vaccine production, shots in the arm, the CoWIN platform, and Vaccine Maitri. 2, the robust economic recovery and the digitally enabled socio-economic delivery on a massive scale. This is important because the global economy continues to face serious headwinds. 3, our growing economic relevance to the world, reflected in greater FDI inflows, greater manufacturing, stronger exports, and an embrace of startups. 4, an independent foreign policy in an increasingly polarized world, one that also speaks for the global South. 5, an innovative diplomacy that has introduced new concepts and platforms, as I mentioned, without according a veto to others on our choices. 6, a resolute national security policy that has seen us standing up to daunting challenges in the border areas, even during the COVID period. 7, a determination to look after our own abroad, be it Operation Ganga in Ukraine or Operation Devi Shakti in Afghanistan. 8, a willingness to look out for others and often serve as a first responder in humanitarian or disaster response situations, especially in our own neighborhood. 9, contributing to a global betterment through initiatives in solar energy, disaster resilience, maritime security, and counterterrorism, amongst others. And 10, a perception that India, as a civilizational state, is finding its place once again in the global order. Now, the combination of changes in our political standing, our economic weight, technology capabilities, cultural influence, and the successes of our diaspora is moving India today into a higher orbit. But let us not underestimate the task ahead. For any power to rise in the global order is never easy. But to do so amidst the turbulence that I have described is doubly difficult. But nevertheless, we see a growing recognition in the world that India is now getting its act together. Equally, there is a realization that the big issues of our times cannot be solved without India's contribution or participation. This is a moment when India resets the terms of engagement with the world. It is also a juncture where we should be prepared to take up greater responsibilities. So, for those who are starting off in life, like so many of you, I can only say that there is every reason to be confident. India today has a leadership and a vision, as well as the perseverance and the commitment to enhance its global standing. To those more experienced who've been part of our national journey for the last 75 years, they will surely appreciate the transformation underway and the opportunities that it has generated, opportunities perhaps that my generation did not have. But to all of them, I would only say that I'm sure that they share the conviction that today India matters more in the world, and we must make the most of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. We take back much to think about from your lecture today, and I'm sure it will inspire future graduates and others to introspect and perhaps recalibrate their choices to deliver better on the needs of the India to enable the country to lead the world. We'll now be opening the house for questions and answers. And for this, may I request Professor Bhaskar Chakrabarty, our Dean Academic, to please moderate the Q&A session.
Thanks a lot, Abhishek. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. We have received a few questions, and maybe we could take them first. Before the talk, we were telling Dr. Jaishankar that this is going to be a curated Q&A. And he smiled and said that curated Q&As are good, but sometimes they do look curated. So when I read the student's name, if you are there, if you could please stand up and identify yourself, unless you are already standing because the auditorium is full. So the first question from Shankar Vinayak, MBA first year. Hi, Shankar. Okay, maybe I can read out your question and then you can add. One of the principles of Indian culture is that of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. How do you think we might apply this principle to develop relations with Central Asian and African economies?
You know, would you like to add something more? No, okay. Look, I'm glad you brought that up for this reason. I was in New York this September. Every September, you know, all the 190 something countries of the world gather in New York. And I met roughly about half the foreign ministers who were there. And I cannot tell you how much our contribution, more than that, our, I would say, mindset during the COVID has impacted the world. There were countries in the Caribbean, countries in the Pacific, countries in Africa who came across, and you know, some of this, by the way, is in YouTube. I'd encourage you to look at it. And none of them are curated, huh? I must tell you. You know, there were actually people who said, look, we want some platform, somewhere we want to say this, that our first vaccine came from you. It came from you when you were still vaccinating your people. And we know there were others who were better off than you were, who actually probably had more vaccines per capita than you did. But you had the heart to give it to us. So, you know, we speak about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world is a family, etc. The reality of that COVID era was also, we saw the selfish side of the world. I mean, there were countries who clamped down on, you know, there was a big struggle in 2020 for PPEs and masks and ventilators and, you know, the initial set of medicines. There have been countries who were incredibly generous. There have been countries who were not. I'm not passing a judgment on those who may not have, you know, done all that they could have. I'm only saying today, the feeling in the world about what we did, I think Indians need to know this, appreciate this fully, because sometimes we ourselves take good deeds for granted, you know. We live, you know, we are a big society, we are in the midst of our own debates, we most of the time are busy talking to ourselves. But there is an enormous goodwill today in the world, including, by the way, in Central Asia, Africa, Central Asia, other parts of the world. But put COVID aside for a moment. You know, you would be perhaps a little surprised to know how many countries in the world today we are active in sharing our development experiences. that when we speak today of digital delivery, or we say, okay, we are, our renewables has grown, or we are doing distance education, or we are propagating e-health. I mean, a lot of this has actually happened in different parts of the world. Again, in a way, perhaps it's not a story which often gets coverage at home. But over the years, I would say particularly in the last decade, our global footprint, India is seen today also as a provider of experiences, of best practices, of sometimes of resources, sometimes of opportunities. So when I speak about rising in the world, rising in the world is not just an accumulation of power. Smart power is also one where you make friends. I mean, the oldest management book in the world, Making Friends and Influencing People. A lot of diplomacy is about making friends and influencing people. And I would suggest to you, if you go through a lot of what the world says about us, you will find that very, very interesting.
Thank you so much. The next question from Abhilash Maji, second year MBA student. Hi, Abhilash. Given the change in the risk of global supply networks, how could India benefit from promoting entrepreneurship in defense and integrating it with innovative defense product manufacturing? There's a related question from a student from our MBA EX program, Deepthi Mishra. The question is about independent foreign policy where dependence is always there and inevitable in trade, defense, culture, and technology.
Let me, I think that's accurate. I don't think in this day and age, any country can say we are not dependent on something. Question is the extent of your dependence and what you do to mitigate it. My own view is over the, we went through a certain period, a certain model, you can say, from the 1950s till the early 90s. Okay, that model fell short, which is why we had the economic reforms, and then from last 30 years, we generally talk of being in a much more reformist era. But in this period, a country of the size of India, the bigger you are, actually the more important it is that you are not hugely vulnerable to the world. You will never be autarkic, but you cannot be completely exposed for your very basic needs to the world. Perhaps if there is, and I say this as self-criticism, of a system, I mean, after all, I have been in that system for that whole period, that the system did not pay enough attention to building the deeper strengths, the supply chains, the domestic industries, the SMEs. And I contrast this because I've had the good fortune of living abroad, coming back to India, going abroad. So I do a lot of my contrasting is with other societies. When I look at a Japan, a Korea, or a China, and saw how at a time of economic growth, they also developed their own, domestic supply chains for a bulk of their requirements. I think there are big lessons to be learned there. And today, I would say there is this big corrective happening that the government is very, very determined. There is an industrial policy which is aimed at building manufacturing. I mean, if you look at the percentage, the proportion of manufacturing in our economy, that's not the number we should have. It should be very much higher. So there is a big push today being given to manufacturing. And again, to do that, we need to attract manufacturing interest from abroad as well. Because our greatest resource is finally people. My sense is, when I look today at the big changes which are taking place, for me, I can see a big change taking place in the semiconductor industry. I was in the US recently last month, and I heard that from the Semiconductor Association there, that American companies alone employ 40,000 Indian engineers in design of chips. Now, we need, it's great if our people have global opportunity, but it's also essential that our entrepreneurship take full advantage of that. And I am a very strong votary of greater industrialization, of more manufacturing. I think this idea that we are naturally born service economy, very bluntly, is a cop-out. I think this is a way of rationalizing our failures. A country like us has to have a manufacturing muscle if we are to go up in the world.
No, thank you very much. Our VLS
Sorry,
students
and by the way, that applies especially to defense. And the interesting thing is, we've just come out of we just come out of this Defense Expo just now in Gandhinagar, and one of the readouts this time was how many Indian companies, especially Indian startups, turned up at Def Expo. And there are young people today who actually have produced things which are making our armed forces look up. And when we see the procurement of our own armed forces, domestic versus foreign, I can tell you there's a very big shift in the last few years. So I see a lot of possibilities there as well.
No, thank you very much. Yeah. Next from Nandan Goel, MBA second year. Nandan is asking, given your expertise in negotiations, what kind of challenges do you think are unique in inter-nation negotiations as opposed to corporate negotiations?
All of us negotiate all the time. Sometimes we don't know it, but we do. Okay. If you are a professional negotiator, in fact, the biggest problem you have even in your own family is your family suspects you are negotiating all the time. Now, the difference between international versus corporate. By corporate, I assume you mean domestic corporate. When you are negotiating, what is the big challenge? It's not only negotiating. Negotiating, competing in any way, is to read the mind of the other party. That's what it is. So before they make their move, you have anticipated their move. They have probably anticipated what you have anticipated, and you have to now figure out the next step. Okay. And it's true in negotiation, it's true in sports. If you watch a cricket match, the person coming in to bat is trying to figure out who's going to bowl, and the person going to bowl is figured out how the person going to bat is going to react to what he's going to bowl. So life is negotiation. But the challenge of negotiation is to understand the mind of the other party. And in a cross-cultural setting, what makes international negotiations hard is the other party is literally foreign to you. That their mental makeup is not something that is readily understandable. So what often happens is, a lot of politicians are very, very comfortable negotiating at home because they are in their own milieu. It's like playing in your own pitches, okay? You know the pitch backwards. You know every bowler. You know every player. Your field setting is perfect. But if you're on a tour abroad, that's why tours abroad are very challenging, because now you're in an international setting. You haven't got all the parameters, you haven't read the minds of that person. That's on international. On the corporate, since I had a brief incarnation there, I would say, many of the same principles apply. Perhaps one difference is sometimes the stakes are much higher in the international ones. Sometimes. Need not be. Some corporate ones can be deadly serious as well. But I would, if I were to take my 3 incarnations, if you would, the long the diplomatic incarnation, the short corporate interaction, and now my learning, I'm a student of politics practicing politics for the last 3 years. I would still say the international one is the most complicated because there are so many more variables that you have to digest and sort of get your algorithm prepared for.
Next from our MBA EX student, Atul Sethia. At the start of an MBA program, we are expected to change our outlook and make it more holistic in order to prepare for the second leg of our careers. We saw you transitioning from a foreign secretary to a foreign minister. What was your transitioning experience, and what was the most important learning from it?
Just to fill in my curriculum vitae, in between from foreign secretary to foreign minister, I did 1 year in the corporate world. Huh? Okay. And I mention it because I still maintain, I still maintain that was my MBA degree. You know, a year with the Tatas was the best MBA degree anybody could have got, at least the exposure that I had. You know, look, quite seriously, I would say there are a number of aspects to it. One, between being, as a civil servant, I was the civil servant head of my ministry. But it's one thing to be that. It's something else to actually have the next layer of responsibility, which is you're now accountable in the cabinet, in the parliament, to the public, in a sense to the world for that particular vertical. So it is sometimes nothing really prepares you for a transition except a transition. And you have to have the ability to learn on the job. You have to keep reminding yourself that there's so much out there you don't know. And if you have I would say the openness of mind today, someone at my stage and age, two things happen to us, okay? One, you actually get smarter younger people. There's a huge problem sometimes because you attribute, there's a sort of unconscious shall I say, inclination to correlate wisdom and experience. Sometimes actually smartness is non-experience. You are not in that mode. The other part of it is when you move into a new domain or a different domain, and a political domain is very different. There are so many more things which, between me as foreign secretary and me as foreign minister, I have another set of variables which I didn't know or wasn't exposed to as foreign secretary, which I am exposed to by sitting in the cabinet, by meeting other ministers, by doing politics, which therefore, give me a super holistic perspective in a sense, you could say. So it is a sort of constant challenge. But I would say, if you enjoy doing what you do, and I think you can all see that I apparently do, but the other part of it is really you must have that in anything, you must have that openness of mind. Because even, say, when I was ambassador, you arrive in a place. Sometimes you've never been to that place before in your life. After you've been there 10 days, the rest of the system thinks that you should answer every possible question or problem relating to that place. So how do you parachute, into something and immediately become operational? That's a great skill. And it's a skill you get by being very, very willing to listen and to learn from everybody. I don't want to call it, it's not a humility, okay? It is actually an openness. the recognition that, you should be, because at the end of the day, that osmosis has to work.
Next one from Professor Shomit Paul. Shomit asks that in the recently held Glasgow summit, India has committed to achieve net zero by 2070. What do you think are the major operational roadblocks specific to India to achieve this goal? And what might be the expected role of the financial sector in removing such roadblocks?
I mean, you can call it roadblock. I would use the word challenge in a way. Look, it's not a problem specific necessarily to India. The biggest problem has been that at every COP, at every meeting, you get promises of finance. And it's really like Groundhog Day. You have that same conversation 1 year later, the next meeting. And if you look back from Kyoto onwards, the fact is that the promises of climate finance have never been taken seriously by the developed countries. They keep saying it, then they will do very creative finance, creative numbers to show something. The reality is this, the vehemence of the rhetoric has never been matched by putting money on the table. This, to my mind, is actually the biggest problem. And nowadays the new narrative is, private sector will come and put money. Now the reality is the private sector will follow if that is the direction in which the world is moving. So ultimately, that kind of green finance, climate finance, has to come from governments, has to come from multilateral development banks. It has to be government-led so that private sector feels that's where it is moving and let me make a business out of it. So I feel that the very basic issue still, is still sort of very unsatisfactory. It is not. In many ways, the developed world is stringing the developing world along. And there is mounting frustration, I think, in large parts of the global south on this.
Maybe we could open up for a couple of questions. Could you please pass the mic around? If you're asking a question, if you could please identify yourself and then ask a question. I could see many hands. We might be able to take 2 or max 3. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. I'm Rahul Kumar Marwal from the one-year MBA program. So you mentioned games between nations. How can we use our influence probably through Quad to make sure that the transfer of F-16 doesn't happen to one of our mischievous neighbor?
The transfer of F-16 has already happened,
yes,
no?
I mean, so that it doesn't happen in near future. Probably.
No, look, why I said the games nations play, partly it's the name of a famous book. But in a sense, I take games, competition, it's a similar sort of attitude. At the end of the day, people are countries, it's all really about countries competing. I think rather than go the pathway which you put it, there is a issue which we have tried to bring out, which is that, if you look at the last 75 years, it has not served the world well by propping up a military dictatorship, by a country over-arming at the expense of its development, by then getting into a mindset where they do things which nowadays, civilized countries don't, which is, for example, support terrorism against their neighbors. So it's an entire package. I think it's important for the world to realize And frankly, even for that particular country to realize, because it has not served that country well either. I mean, if you see, after all of us do performance evaluation of ourselves. I think if the countries of this region did their performance evaluation, there are some standout lessons out here. I think it's important for the world to realize that, and it's, clearly that's a messaging which we will keep sending out. Sometimes it has a greater impact, sometimes it has a less impact, sometimes people have their own angles or their games, if you would. So that's the way it is.
Thanks, sir. Yeah. So, good evening, sir. I'm Kamal Agarwal. I'm an auditor by profession. And actually, I'm myself going through a career transition as well. So,
welcome to the club.
Picked up a few things from you on this. My question is more, we spoke about looking at India leading the world, nation building, and all that. While looking at all this, how to deal with the internal issues that we have as a country today? More political, I'm alluding to. And I have two actually points to make over there, or other things to reflect on. One is, many times we see political gains more often than not take precedence over national interest. We see that happening so often. And the other is, how do you have a strong country building up when there isn't any strong opposition in the first place? We have the government, but there's not a strong opposition also to kind of keep the, kind of a little balance around the functioning of the government. So how does all this kind of combine together to put India in a leadership position then?
Look, I would agree with you very much that it's important that we put national interest first, that the politics of the day should not trump in a sense, the larger interests of the nation. And clearly, that's you can say is a discipline or a approach that all politicians should have in the country. Now, it's obviously easy to say. It doesn't always get done. And I in my own remarks, I cited two examples. I mean, if you look at the whole Article 370 issue, I mean, let's be honest, other than the politics of the day, what was the reason for a temporary provision to continue so long? It was really the politics of the day. And the fact that we had such a sort of messy issue there, I mean, the entire world used it for the last 75 years. So, and the other is really securing our borders. That the politics of the day should not lead our borders to be vulnerable. I mean, I could come up with other examples. So I agree with you. I think to some extent we have to create a culture. To some extent, public opinion has to also, the force of public opinion is a very powerful force. Politics responds to what is, politics may shape public mood. But believe me, public mood also shapes politics. I mean, as a relatively new entrant into this, I can tell you, when I look at people, in my peer group and see how the sense of the public resonates with them, it is something which matters. On the issue, look, you spoke about strong opposition. It's not the job of the government to create an opposition, okay? But bear in mind, we are a very diverse country. We are a diverse, pluralistic country. So sometimes I feel this obsession that, somewhere we're all going in one direction. I don't think, to me, that's not the reality of this country. This is a country, it has its own, it has its pluralism, it has its diversity, it has its checks and balances, it has its democracy. You get very overblown rhetoric. But I want you to step back for a minute and tell me, every time there's an election in this country, everybody argues about it till the election results comes out. Everybody follows the election result. Okay? Now, I can tell you a few places they still debate it. So my point is, I feel our politics, our governance, our systems, we have a lot of room to grow. I'm not at all suggesting anywhere, if I were grading it, I would be a little bit, maybe strict about it. But the fact is, we also have many things we have done which we should be proud of. When I go around the world and I look at some of these debates around the world, I mean, in this country, if you look over the last 50, 60, 70 years, who can say that the life has not got better? Look at how much more inclusive we have become, not in terms of tokenism, but inclusive in terms of prosperity, opportunities. I mean, I would say, if you were to take your own students, I guarantee you, your current cohort, the people in this room would be much more diversely, diverse in their origin and in their, in their education than it would have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And to me, that's proof that the system is working, system is delivering.
Maybe the last question.
Hello, sir. My name is Mahesh. My question is this, any special policy regarding the agriculture industry? Because we know that we are dependent on the other country for the fertilizers and chemical raw material.
Yes, it is, somewhere, you remember we had somebody asked this question about dependence. That was said more in the context of defense. But if you look today at what are the big imports of India, the big imports of India are oil and gas, electronics, and fertilizers. These are actually like right up there. The problem with fertilizers is a lot of them, a big part of the fertilizer industry is directly linked to gas. So there are limits to what we can make economically at home. But this is where diplomacy comes in. That it is today, for me, when people speak foreign policy, diplomacy, it's not that airy-fairy stuff, saying the right things at the right place, etc. To me, these are bread and butter issues. If I, at the end of my day, say today I have made sure that an Indian consumer is paying less for the petrol at the petrol pump. An Indian farmer is assured of fertilizers at the right time. An Indian household is getting its, food and cooking oil at the right price. To me, these are really my benchmarks of what is successful diplomacy. And in the last few months, especially after the Ukraine conflict started, but even prior to that, we've been working very hard at diversifying our sources of fertilizers, at trying to reach long-term understandings with suppliers so that we stabilize it for our farmers. We've had a reasonable measure of success out there. I mean, there's still work to be done, but it is something very important because I do see a period where I'm absolutely convinced that this country will emerge actually as a serious agricultural exporter. You raise fertilizers, I actually put to you something very different. We are, this 2023 is an international year of the millets. If you look at the tradition, the history of millet production in India, it's a very long history. A lot of people ate millets till the new cereals came along. So so there are big possibilities there, and definitely the interests of the farmer and making sure that fertilizers are available in equal, reasonable quantity is very important. I think that you said there's one more question.
Namaste, sir.
Yeah, please.
Namaste, sir. Can I ask a question?
Just stand up and, yeah,
So-
please do, yeah. This would be the final
So can we
last
take one
question.
question from the top? Yeah.
Okay.
Wait a minute. There's one here, then you.
I wanted to ask that you talked about globalization and technology and the global supply chains and how does it affect the current scenario. So considering our neighbor and considering that Taiwan is a mega hub for semiconductor fabs, what is our diplomatic stand regarding Taiwan?
Interest of time, shall I take that one also?
I think that would be nice, yeah.
Namaste, sir. My question to you is that how does the mood swing of Uncle Sam affect our algorithm to deal with them?
That's it? Huh? Okay.
I think we'll
Okay. Look, today there is a big semiconductor debate going on in the world. How do you hedge the risks in the semiconductor business? And where India is concerned, there is please. Where India is concerned, you would have noted that we've also started a semiconductor mission. Again, as I said, we can always say we should have done something before, but at least better we start doing it sometime. So there is a very, very big push today by the government to encourage Indian industry to sort of advance partnerships with foreign technology providers or foreign chip makers or foreign fab owners to see how much of that industry can come. Now, it's a very tough industry because it has very, very high specs. So we will have to upgrade the environment for an industry like this to come. It's not something which is very easy to do. But if you look at the last few years, if I had told you 10 years ago that, look, you would start getting smartphone manufacturing in India more or less at the rest, the same as the rest of the world, you would have taken it with more than a pinch of salt. But that is today happening. So we believe it can happen. We have a policy to make it happen. We have incentives to make it happen. But we understand also these, does require creating that kind of larger environment, not just a physical environment for production, but even a knowledge environment, an educational environment for the human talent for a semiconductor business. On the mood swings, well, look, it's like this. The United States in many ways is a very unique country. Now, in a way you can say everybody is unique. But when you are number one in the world, when you are the most powerful country in the world, then their uniqueness impacts everybody else. If some other country which in economic terms or power terms is number 150 and they have a bad day, maybe the rest of the world will not notice it. But when you are number one and things go this way or that way, it actually has global repercussions. And a lot of it is because you have in many ways the consensus within the American establishment has frayed over the last few years. That has been very visible. Some of it is their electoral cycle also, that they have a 4-year presidential cycle, but they have a congressional cycle of 2 years. So there is that. And then they have a separation of powers, which again is very unique. There are very few countries where the legislature has such an autonomous position from the executive. So the point is that there are a number of reasons why I would say managing the relationship with the United States requires a certain devotion of time, energy, understanding, chemistry, call it what you will. And I would say, last 20 years we've not done a bad job. I mean, I would give myself decent marks. Decent marks. Thank you, sir.
No, Sri Krishna ji and Dr. Jaishankar have been very liberal with time. Sri Krishna ji was asking why not that question and why not this one. What they possibly do not know is that we all wake up after our classes get over at 6. So the full energy comes at 8:45 in the evening. And if we really wish to go on, we could go on for at least another 3 or 4 hours. So we'd rather stop here. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar.
Thank you so much, sir. Your answers were candid. And we also learned that, sometimes the difficult questions can actually be answered in simple yet candid manner. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I now invite Sri Krishna Kulkarni, Chairperson of the Board of Governors of IIM Calcutta, to please deliver the concluding remarks for today's event.
It's before I start, I was thinking, of course, let me say, Honorable External Affairs Minister, Sri Jaishankar, Dr. Jaishankar, dear students of IIM Calcutta, faculty colleagues, members joining us online, members of the staff, other guests, ladies and gentlemen, namaskar to all of you. Also, Dr. Jaishankar, thank you very much for sharing with us your deep insights on the complex issue of India and the world. You sent us the topic. I was contemplating that I have this onerous task of concluding remarks. And probably it's the most difficult talk that I'm trying to do. And so you can grade me, and if I will try to match up, at least as a student, I'm allowed to try to match up to somebody who have, by the way, I should share that I have had the privilege of knowing Dr. Jaishankar from 1996 when he was Deputy Chief of Mission in Tokyo. In those days, I used to be the country head and managing director of world's largest robot manufacturer's operations in India called Fanuc India. And he was very, very gracious even in those days. So, sir, I remember all those days. But I have followed him silently as he has traversed the globe, including the things which Uttam Da read out about his role in IPKF, political advisor, nuclear deals. And of course, in those days, my horizons were more narrow. As you grow older, you don't necessarily become smarter, but yes, you do become a little more open because the runway starts ending. You can see the end of the runway. And then really, you lose this aggression about life. You start soaking in life because you know the runway will end. It happens, but it doesn't happen to you to us. We all know it ends, but it doesn't happen very early on. So I've been following sir for some time. I watch your YouTube videos, but over the last few days since he so graciously accepted our request, and Abhishek, thank you so much, Abhishek, for, the PGP is the traditional committee which does managing this, and Abhishek was gracious enough to allow us to play a combinatory role in this. So, but over the last few days, I have wondered how I should use this time allocated to me for concluding remarks. And there is just no way that you can do anything but anticipate. So I was very keenly listening to you about negotiations, and was I able to read your mind, both the political, the diplomatic, and of course, the other traditional aspects of a career civil servant. So what I'm going to speak will not cover the gamut of things that he touched upon, and I can only apologize to all of you, but it's just humanly not possible to follow an act like this. But I decided that I will share some experiences, because I know I have gleaned from whatever I have seen, and I believe that I have a good handle on Dr. Jayashankar's personality, and it's that courage which is allowing me to share some experiences. It is my hope that in sharing these experiences, I will be able to touch key aspects that for me define Bharat, that is India, and in doing so do justice to Dr. Jayashankar's talk, which was India and the world. But I said, okay, he's spoken India and the world. Do I even know India? And can I take this opportunity to put my thoughts as concluding remarks as a student in front of him? And of course, I don't have the privilege of him grading me right now or telling me kya hai. But I will take this leap of faith, a risk, and I'll go ahead with it. So first point, in 2015-16, not so far away, I had the privilege to join my teacher, Shri M, on a Padyatra from Kanyakumari in South India to Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir. This walk traversed 7,500 kilometers across India, and it lasted for 16 months. Now, why do I say this? Over these 16 months, I had ample time to think and consolidate my views and my reasoning about my own country and the confusions that I had, which most of us have. He talked about how we debate among our circles. And I think my debates with my cohorts was no different. I'm sure, plus minus, it's happening the same in your hostels. So I summarize my views from that walk. 16 months, every day walking, 7,500 kilometers. I cut down my digital footprint to emergency calls. My wife is sitting here. My son stopped talking to me, saying, "Ye to pagal ho gaya." Anyways, so what did I glean? 4 points. I understood, and today I'm comfortable with my understanding, that it is our spiritual heritage, Sanatan Dharma as it's called, that continues to bind us as one people, which then becomes one nation. That's my first point. And in this, the second point is, somebody talked about Vasudeva Kutumbakam and put a question to him, and this is so opportune. If you have some idea of our scriptures, thousands of years ago, our scriptures have actually mentioned one line I'm picking up, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, which means the happiness for all sentient lives on this planet Earth. Now, this is, you can't get anything more secular than Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina. It does not say, Bharatiya Bhavantu Sukhina or some XYZ country or some religious denomination. So this is not religion out here. And this, I want to talk to the youngsters in the presence of our External Affairs Minister and say, we adopt, this was said thousands of years before we adopted our constitution on 26 January 1950. And then sometime later, we amended our constitution. The preamble to the constitution was amended, which is the 42nd Amendment. And we added the word secular in that. So I want you people to consider, that the word secular in our solemn resolution in defining what constitutes Bharat, we may have put it up as a 42nd Amendment, but our forefathers in this land had already articulated it beautifully thousands of years ago. Therefore, we must never forget that Bharat Maa ka aanchal jo hai, bahut bada hai. And I'm sorry I'm speaking Hindi because certain things I get back into my vernacular. I cannot speak in English in the same bhava. So, भारत माता का आंचल इतना बड़ा है कि जो भी आया, जैसे भी आया, समा गया. Whoever came, everybody's become a part of this national, cauldron. Now, but having said that, I had time to contemplate. We boast about, and this is bandied very, very often, especially in debates, political debates, that, there is unity in our diversity. You must have heard about that. Now, my view on this over the 16-month walk, I came to crystallize as a student that yes, there is unity in diversity, but hey, take a note of the fact that the key word in this is unity and not diversity. Think about it for a second, When unity is compromised, even a family falls prey to destructive forces. And Dr. Jaishankar alluded to that unity, whether it is a political unity or a government's unity, or the way in which views are united when we negotiate. So unity is truly the key word, and we should not get swayed just by the fact that there is diversity. Diversity must be celebrated, but not minus unity. This is my view. You guys are students of management, finance. You can discount it at any rate you wish to. I'll be happy to accept that. And finally, Bharat, that is India. And this was asked by my son, Vishnu, who said, Baba, you went for a walk. Did you figure out, are we a nation? Now, my answer to him, and I still hold it, and this is after I actually walked the country, 7,500 kilometers, is that Bharat, that is India, is not a nation. I think it's the world inside a nation. It is truly a world inside a nation. If you're flying from point A to point B, you'll never realize it. Trust me, someday any one of you has the gumption, take out a pair of shoes and walk this nation. You will realize this is not a nation. This is the world inside a nation. Now, Dr. Jaishankar and his team at the Ministry of External Affairs are doing a phenomenal job for us. I mean, I have absolutely no compunction in sharing my heart with the adjectives, but adjectives limit me, but still. Sir, it is such a privilege to have you represent us globally. Your unswerving commitment to national interest, hard work, and intellectual integrity make us feel safe and reassured. But all of us sitting here and joining in through the live link should never forget, any external affairs posture. Now, I have zero experience in diplomacy, external affairs, but I'm a thinking human being, and I put my thought to it. I said, Dr. Jaishankar represents us, and any external affairs posture that we as a nation have or wish to have, and the conviction and the strength that we can project or wish to project is predicated on the strength back home. What is the strength? There is a strength behind Dr. Jaishankar, why he is able to fully exercise. And this is an institute lecture series, so it's a talk to students, and I'm sure sir will allow me this latitude. So when I speak about what do you mean by the strength back home, so there are many factors, but two of the key factors that contribute to this strength back home, in my view, are our social unity, of which social awareness is a part, because unless there is social awareness, there is no way you can have social mobilization, and if you don't have social mobilization, you can't have development. And the second one is our economic strength. Now, I will limit myself to the second part, the economic strength, which has two dimensions, which I think all of us know about: gross domestic product as one. But I also feel the second one is gross domestic employment, and sir talked about it in a way. So economic strength, in my view, and again, this is through the walk, I saw the entire strata of India's economics layers. And I personally believe that economic strength is not only about wealth creation, but it is also about, one, access to wealth creation. And let me share here an experience which changed my views. It was in 2012-13 that I was asked to work as a consultant to the government of Gujarat. Actually, I was asked to be an employee, but I could not take up that opportunity for personal reasons, and I was asked be a consultant to us. And it was the area which I have never worked in. It was an area of rural development, primarily to do with rural livelihoods. As my job, I visited, because I'm a hands-on, detailed kind of a guy, I know I'm a pain in the, where to many of them, they can say that, but I am a detailed man. Just that's how my training has been. And I visited umpteen, I go to the ground wherever it is. So I visited umpteen villages, met with even more self-help groups of women, SHGs as they are called. Now, these women used to create wealth. They would make things, as Sir called it, manufacturing. You manufacture a quilt, you manufacture something. It is truly creating value and wealth. But what was disturbing was that they created wealth, but they did not have ready access to it, that wealth that they created. And even more disturbing was that the ownership of that wealth that they created, they had unfairly a very small proportion of the ownership of that wealth, Now, I clearly remember in those days I used to report to the then Chief Minister, who is now our Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Bhai Modi. And as his style is, and probably Dr. Jaishankar knows him so much more intimately, I wanted to ask, but I hesitated because today is the Students' Day. What is the style working for him? Because I had a short stint of 6 months. And the gentleman debriefs you regularly. And it's a one-to-one meeting. And I would have the 6-7 months I was there, there was a monthly meeting. The longest lasted, because till he picks up everything, the longest lasted about 50 minutes. And towards the other end, once he had got the handle on it, meetings would last 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I still clearly remember that day wherein I shared with him the dilemma of the woman from a SHG. So SHGs used to have a bank account in the name of that self-help group. And the women were still poor. So he asked me कि Krishna, हम पैसे डालते हैं तो परिणाम क्यों नहीं आता है? This is his style, And I said, sir, I have gone to the villages and I have seen and I have analyzed, but I am not sure, but I will share my views with you. And I said, कि sir, SHG को आपने account दिया है, but have you ever thought of giving an account to that individual woman? तो वो illiterate है, पर अगर आप उसको account देंगे, तो एक financial inclusion का feeling आता है, and that will rapid strides into social inclusion. This is all that was our discussion. Many years later, it's probably that factor germination, which I believe, and that could be my arrogance, it could be something else, I believe translated into something so much more different, which you all know is called the Jan Dhan Yojana. And so it was a pleasure working with him. Now, I also believe that true economic strength is about making available the ownership of that wealth. So one is create wealth, second is ownership to wealth, the third is, are we as a society making available the ownership of that wealth to the broadest cross-section of society? This needs to be reviewed in our own hearts. Now, so I articulated that we therefore want to increase the middle class while continuing to increase the millionaire class. You cannot ignore one for the other. Now, to achieve such economic strength, the government and industry have recognized the urgent need for a vibrant manufacturing sector, and Sir alluded to it today. So I questioned myself that in a concluding remarks, we just don't say yes to everything. So what impedes India's manufacturing sector? Now, a popular excuse for given is its troubles is inadequate infrastructure, inflexible labor laws and regulatory frameworks. But what is not widely discussed, and I was in the manufacturing sector, what is not widely discussed is the inadequacy of strategy both at the corporate and national levels, and a general disinclination to take higher entrepreneurial risks, and adequately trained manpower, you know. So mindsets actually change far more slowly than technology and competition. Now, in countries such as China, Japan, and Germany that have very competitive manufacturing sectors, things get done. Now, I went to graduate school at the University of Tokyo in Japan and specialized in control systems theory, manufacturing automation, and robotics. You know, I speak Japanese fluently, and I know how Japanese companies and their governments nurture their supplier ecosystem. Their governments actually intervene through policy actions to support the sector to withstand competition, and all gave special attention to small and medium enterprises, which you call SMEs and MSMEs, to make them competitive drivers of technology. Now, in contrast, I lived through that era when India, and this is what Dr. Jaishankar alluded to, that after 1992, we opened up. But we actually opened up. But what did we do? We actually concentrated on reducing excessive role of government. The focus has been on overall economic growth, but not particularly on the manufacturing sector. So when I look at it from my perspective, the policy pendulum actually swung from one extreme of excessive controls by the state to, I'm putting it for dramatic purpose, to actually abandonment of the manufacturing sector entirely. Also, in our country, on the other hand, strategies, policies, and plans almost never get implemented or completed on time. The root causes of this possibly are inadequate consensus among stakeholders for policy changes and very poor planning and coordination among agencies for timely execution of policies and projects. Now, this unfortunate lack of timeliness tends to have a cost. We in India cannot afford to continue to miss the bus, not merely in terms of implementing reforms on time, but also in terms of loss of policy space. The competition we have to face therefore becomes harder. This is what I see when I analyze this. Now, manufacturing is not only the backbone of an economy, it is actually the muscle behind national security. Dr. Jaishankar actually alluded to it just now. It just happens that I wrote this point down. Now, this painful realization came home to me the first time when India faced severe sanctions and import restrictions after Pokhran II nuclear testing in 1998. I was in the manufacturing sector. The sanctions were almost entirely aimed at crippling our manufacturing capabilities. The second time it came home to me painfully was during the Kargil operations in 1999. Now, increasingly, it is becoming evident that a long-term source of competitive advantage accrues on an ability of agencies and teams of skilled people to collaborate efficiently. Now, Prime Minister Modi spoke about $1 trillion of infrastructure in this country. Now, traditionally, we will not look at infrastructure, say, development of, say, building bridges, building a port, or building an airport. Traditionally, that is infrastructure development. But how many of us know that building a bridge is also manufacturing? It's not your traditional manufacturing in a factory. It's manufacturing on the site. So infrastructure is also manufacturing. So developing infrastructure is also manufacturing. So when he said manufacturing is the muscle behind Indian security, it just resonates in my heart. And so thank you so much, sir. So, now, there is no doubt that without a strong manufacturing sector, India's demographic dividend may turn out into a nightmare of unemployed youth. It's a possibility. Now, manufacturing, therefore, has the potential to be the lifeblood of the Indian economy, but it direly needs visionary leadership, leaders who will transform Indian manufacturing to become globally competitive. Now, these leaders will have to navigate through numerous challenges, and I'm not going to articulate, I had written down quite a few points, but just to name a few, anticipating and leveraging rapid technological innovations and disruptions, rising customer expectations, and an educated, individualistic workforce. And with technology which is breaking down barriers, that means silo existence is no more becoming possible, these leaders, they're tasked to build trust and be effective change agents will become that much more difficult than their predecessors. Now let us for one moment shift gears and look at how the nation looks from the eyes of the Government of India. The Government of India, Dr. Jaishankar and his people, the GOI under Prime Minister Modi, and how do they see the same nation which we see? So the GOI, as I see it, is constantly scanning, looking at national issues, and needing to articulate a vision to resolve these issues. They come out in schemes, and now it further needs to convert a vision into a policy, and a policy must be implemented with last mile execution. So when I look at this, and then I look at the Government of India, I can see that, and here I'm articulating without their permission or without any comparison of notes, so this is not curated. Their vision, this government's visions that I see, and then I define what I think should be the right vision for all of us, you as management students, we as management institutes. Now, any vision to be termed as a vision, it must be, I think, where you do good through you and not for you. This is a subtle difference. If you're doing good for you, I would call it a goal, it's not a vision. But if the good is happening through you, but not for you, that is a worthy vision. Now, scan their schemes and you will see that it probably fits 100%. Now, subsequent to this, they even go to the next step, which is a very messy affair, which is create policy for that. Those of you who have created policy will vibe with me that it's very easy to bandy it in an MBA classroom, but creating policy is not easy, it's messy. Talking vision is easy, but I have just put a filter on it that makes it that much more difficult. But writing policy is messy. And further, executing on policy with last mile implementation is the hardest of all. The god of success in this is in the details, And on all of our counts, our government led by the Honorable Prime Minister and his able team have shown exemplary ability and resilience to deliver. So I think we should give an applause to them. So, thank you very much for resonating with me. I was hesitating, shall I request this? Because, if you guys don't clap, it falls flat, then it becomes truly curated. So thank you very much. Now, but let me caution us, this euphoria should be cautioned. The government alone cannot be held responsible. All institutions in India need to deliver. Are we delivering is a question we must ask individually as institutionally. So we at IIM Calcutta are acutely aware that as an educational institution of eminence, our responsibility is therefore that much higher. And it is my proud privilege, sir, to share with you that we have a program called the PGP-EX VLM program, which is Visionary Leaders for Manufacturing, program launched by IIM Calcutta, IIT Kanpur and IIT Madras in 2007 under the aegis of the National Manufacturing Competitive Council. And that has been endeavoring over the years to educate and build the pool of visionary leaders for the manufacturing industry of this country, sir. While we are proud to be a national asset, a crucible where visionary leaders are molded, we are also aware that a lot more needs to be done. In closing, I would like to stress that creating jobs, this is my view again, is not the domain of the government. You'll find this debate happening again. Bhai, how many jobs did you create? You see it every time on primetime TV, somebody is berating the other. But all of you touch your heart and tell me, is it the job of the government? After liberalization, I know that in the boardrooms that I sat, the decision on whether to hire or not was taken in the boardroom. What does the government have to do with it? We are going to employ only that much, the rest is automated. Does the government have a role in it? I think this decision pretty much gets squared up in boardrooms, because the decisions on jobs, employee hiring is of boardrooms, corporations. So it is the manufacturing sector, but still again coming back, it is the manufacturing sector that will create long-term employment opportunities and sustained high GDP growth. But let me caution us, but it will probably not be at a scale that 2 generations of Chinese companies enjoyed, because automation is and has and will continue to eliminate jobs. This is a reality. So then what? So adequately and appropriately trained manpower will definitely have opportunities in manufacturing, but it is the SMEs, MSMEs that have the potential to be large-scale employers, and this is in the realm of entrepreneurs, and therefore our ability to support them with adequate policy interventions to withstand competition will become critical in my view. It is therefore my belief that a key factor in the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat will be the role played by our entrepreneurs. With that, I will end. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you, sir, for your concluding remarks. You have not only reminded us of our duties, but also reaffirmed IMC's role and its commitment in building the country. May I request you, Mr. Kulkarni, to kindly present a memento to our chief guest. As we bring today's event to a close, I request Professor Manish Thakur, our Dean for New Initiatives and External Relations, to please deliver the vote of thanks.
डॉक्टर एस जयशंकर, माननीय विदेश मंत्री भारत सरकार, श्री कृष्ण कुलकर्णी जी, IIM कलकत्ता के अधिशासी मंडल के अध्यक्ष, प्रोफेसर उत्तम सरकार, निर्देशक IIM कलकत्ता, प्रोफेसर भास्कर चक्रवर्ती, डीन अकादमिक, सहकर्मियों और मित्रों, it's indeed an honor to offer vote of thanks at the 33rd Institute lecture this evening. First of all, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Honorable Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar for having so kindly agreed to our invitation to deliver this lecture. As you all have realized, in half an hour's time, the Honorable Minister has given us a synoptic overview of multiple challenges facing India's foreign policy. We thank you for such an instructive lecture, which so clearly articulated India's place in the Committee of Nations, the committee which is characterized by multiple fractures and select couplings. These are your words, multiple fractures and select couplings. As Indians, we also had a reassuring sense from his lecture that this nation is aware of the uncertainty and insecurity in the global arena, and India is more than willing to champion the interests of the global South. And ultimately, when I was listening to you, your ultimate concluding remarks, that at least I think that gave me, and I'm sure it has given all of us, a sense of pride that India matters to the world, and it matters to the world today much more than ever. So thank you so much for all your lecture. And now I would like to thank Sri Krishna Kulkarni ji, Chairperson BOG, for his reflections on an entire gamut of issues, and moreover, his own unique thoughts on the timeless heritage of what he calls Bharat. We heard him on a number of issues, but his thoughts were worthy of debate, discussion, and I'm sure some of us would carry it to our reflective offices and classrooms. Sri Krishna ji has, I have been always maintaining this, and I have told him this morning that he is like the Karta of Hindu joint family that IIM Calcutta is. And in that sense, we always depend on him, and he is the one who always gives us encouragement when an encouragement is due. And more importantly, he always stands for us, and he never hesitates to cover us for all our efficiencies in the larger interests of the IIM Calcutta. And to tell you the truth, this evening has been made possible because of his sole unaided efforts. I think this must go on record. So thank you, sir, for all your efforts and initiative so that we have Dr. Jayasankar with us this evening. Our director, Professor Uttam Sarkar, he has always been supportive in all our endeavors, and that too, and I must emphasize that, in the most non-interfering manner. I thank you, Professor Sarkar, for your genteel leadership and consistent help. An event of this nature, as you all are aware, calls for coordination among different departments in the institute. I thank all our faculty colleagues, administrative officers, and staff for their collective efforts towards this program. These administrative teams were led by Sri Alok Chandra, who is there, our Chief Administrative Officer at the level of the institute, and Sri Amitabha Bhaudri at the MBA office, and not to forget our webmaster, Sri Arindam Bhattacharya, who looked after this webcasting, live webcasting of this lecture. And lastly, I would like to thank Professor Abhishek Goyal, Chairperson MBA program, who worked tirelessly to ensure that all logistical arrangements were in place. And you will agree with me that the event unfolded seamlessly thanks to all his efforts and his work behind the scenes. We were on the dais, he was working behind the scenes. And a program of this nature is inconceivable without a discerning audience like yours. So let's give a big hand to all of you, rather all of us. Thank you. Jai Hind.
So with this, we conclude the program. Thank you.
You are requested to please wait till the dignitaries leave the place.
नहीं किया आपको नहीं